If you live in the real world, you want to hear what Dr. Bruce Rubenstein has to say.
If you live in the spiritual world, you will want to hear what Rabbi Shea Hecht has to say.
We may agree,
And we may disagree.
but you want to hear both views.
So let's get right to it. Welcome to another episode of The Rabbi and the Therapist. And one of the viewers sent in a question inquiring about anxiety, which then got me interested to ask the Rabbi, does the Torah address anxiety, or conversely, how to stay peaceful and calm?
I think there's many different places within the Torah, directly and indirectly, talks about mindset, the fancy word we use today,
Okay.
but yes, remaining calm. It's interesting in Maimonides when it talks about believing in God, and it goes into so many details of how I have to believe in God and to recognize that God has a power and control over even little details. And I think that the number one way of staying calm is recognizing that I am in God's hands. Lahavdil, if I can make it, in the 12-step programs, the first step is recognize that I'm powerless over my addiction. In this case, I'm simply in life. I know I can rely on God. Things are going to work out. It's going to be good. And that is a very, very important mindset for us to be calm. And more importantly, I believe if we take the Rambam's ideas of belief in God and understanding God, it goes under that umbrella that if I'm believing in God, I believe in God even in the little things. Mm-hmm. I missed a bus. It was for a reason. Not that I had to hear a story that, the bus later had an accident. Oh, thank God I wasn't on the bus. No. Right in the beginning, I understand that was not the bus for me to make. How many times do we get on the wrong bus or the next bus and we meet somebody that we needed to meet? That one we see is God's hand immediate. But even when we don't see God's hand, just recognizing that everything is in the hands of God, I believe that is enough for us to stay calm.
Okay, so then how would you respond to someone who came to you and said, Rabbi, I live with anxiety 24/7. I wake up in the morning, I feel anxious. It lasts throughout the whole day. I go to sleep with it. And you're telling me that's in God's hands?
No, I think there's two categories of people who worry, which then comes to anxiety.
Yeah.
People who worry about important things. You know what? I need to worry about something. And there also we do play the card of faith. But hey, it's my last day to pay my mortgage. I don't have the money in the account. I'm nervous about making my payment. They're going to close my electric. What do I do? That's one category of worry and anxiety.
And the other?
And then the other is I worry about things to worry about. I just worry because I worry. I have anxiety without even necessarily knowing what the situation is. Look, there's no question about it. When people come to my office, I usually ask them 3 questions with young people. Number 1, do you do any exercise? Number 2, do you get a good night's sleep? And number 3, do you take vitamins? What is those 3 things have in common? Do you take care of yourself? Mm-hmm. And that's the same thing for our mind, our heart, our behavior. Mm-hmm. So should we take a walk once a day to help us relax? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's healthy. We should do some exercise. Mm-hmm. Should we get a good night's sleep? Yes, we should get a good night's sleep. Problem is, of course, with people with anxiety, they can't fall asleep. And then we can, sometimes we have to go to the doctor to get something to help us sleep. And sometimes the question of just simply relaxing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I wish that in what I did, it was as straightforward as that. And maybe the people that come to see me, they're pre-selected for the people who have tried all of that and it doesn't work. We usually think of anxiety as a state of dread. That's the feeling. It's not a thought. It's actually a feeling. And we know that it is mediated by what's called our sympathetic nervous system, adrenaline, flight or fight response. The other interesting thing about it is that there's certain people that actually thrive on anxiety. I would guarantee you that 99% of the people that are on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, they thrive on that sense of anxiety, and it sort of pushes them forward. So then the question is, where's that line where that anxiety starts interfering with someone's life in a very negative, non-productive way? Apropos sleep, by the way, it's been definitively shown that behavioral interventions for insomnia are far more effective than medications. So although
sort of the exercise?
No, actually there are certain,
breathing?
No, for example, all you do in your bed is sleep.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
You don't watch TV, you don't eat dinner, you don't do any of those things. You don't use any screens, cell phones, TV, computer for hopefully 2 hours before you go to sleep. There are now special exercises.
2 hours before you go to sleep?
Yeah, it turns out that the rays, particularly from television, hit certain receptors in the back of your eyes that are stimulatory. And you don't want to be stimulating those before you go to sleep. And then when all else fails, there are medications which we use. Unfortunately, many of them are addictive, and we try to stay away from them.
The joke in the Orthodox world is if you're having difficulty sleep, take a safer. Take a learning book to learn something, and
it'll put you to sleep.
It'll put you to sleep.
Yeah.
No, on a serious note, I do tell people very similar. I said, if you give yourself a choice, that I can be on my computer or I can sleep when I'm in bed, guess what? Going on the computer is a lot more interesting than sleeping. But when I put my head on the pillow, I think I have two choices. I can lie in the pillow and sleep, or I can lie in the pillow and be up. Oh, then sleep is a much better
option, right?
And if you give yourself that option, that I can be in bed and sleep, or be in bed and do nothing, versus all these other interruptions
we can do.
and interferences.
But let's pull it back. Our topic is anxiety and not insomnia, right?
Right.
Okay. So we have this internal sense of dread, and we don't like walking around with it. So what do? Human beings are creatures of attribution. We have to attribute our anxiety to something. So I wake up for whatever reason and feel anxious. And I say to myself, gosh, why am I anxious? We're motivated to try to find a reason for that anxiety. Why? Because if we can find a reason for it, we can then go and intervene, change the circumstance, and then we won't be anxious. But guess what? 90% of the time, that's not the reason you're anxious, and you end up messing with something you shouldn't have messed with in the first place. You should have left it alone.
Or if you change it, it's not going to necessarily take away the anxiety anyways.
Exactly. Precisely.
It's not going to make you feel any more calm.
Well, you start with one problem. Sometimes you end up with two if you change something that shouldn't be changed. But what's interesting that I will share with you is that a conversation amongst my colleagues is that we have been noticing a general rise in general anxiety over the past few years. Some people attribute it to the pandemic, not the actual virus,
yes,
but the effects that had on our social interactions, our isolation, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not quite sure exactly what it is, but I do think it's absolutely real, and we're seeing it increasingly. I also think that, and I don't know how prevalent this is in the Hasidic community, although I wouldn't be surprised if it's more prevalent than people think, but with the legalization of cannabis, cannabis in the very short term will calm people down, but the lingering effects of it are extremely deleterious. causing tremendous anxiety, depression, even psychosis and worse. I do think that that's a significant contributing factor.
Dr. Bruce, you didn't say it loud enough. You didn't say it long enough. You didn't stress.
What did I say?
There are people who simply don't seem to get it. They're called drugs because they're drugs. They're not going to help anything. The only one that maybe it'll help is someone who's suffering from a cancer, God forbid.
Agreed.
And that's it.
Agreed.
Any other case, if you are smoking, if you are taking the pills, I'm telling you right now, your situation is going to get worse. That's what studies show. A number of months ago, there was an article in the New York Times, an extensive article in the New York Times about cannabis, about what we call mahawana. It doesn't do what it claims to do. And people are foolish to buy into it. It's all about making money. It's being pushed by the wrong people for the wrong reasons with the wrong results.
Well, again, topic was not supposed to be cannabis, but while we're talking about it, the other thing I just have to say, because I see it in the hospital. If you buy it from a dispensary, the dispensaries are all competing and they want you to buy from their dispensary. What they're doing is they're taking a certain portion of it and they're concentrating it in an oil and then soaking the product they sell in that oil. So something which should be roughly 20 to 25% potent in terms of its effect on your brain, they're selling it at 70 to 80%. Those that buy it off the street, same thing. Dealers are in competition. They want you to get the best buzz. They're spiking it with all sorts of things, from fentanyl to PCP to cocaine to even things like detergent, things we can't even test for, just so you feel a burn so that you think you're getting a bigger high from it. My question for you actually is, I don't have a sense. Do you have a sense of the penetrance of cannabis in the Hasidic community right now?
I'm afraid to give the number, but it's definitely double digits.
Really?
Yeah. And of course, young people more than older people. I believe it is, what did I say, pandemic proportions. Mm-hmm. I want to go back in 2000. I tell people this often. In 2015, they said by the year 2025, over 90% of the people will be in therapy. And one of the reasons is because of anxiety.
Yeah.
Number one. Number two is just to juxtapose that with something very interesting. I have a daughter who is EMT. 2021, which was not the year, in other words, of COVID. It was the next summer. Right. She went to a camp, and she was the nurse in camp. And she called me up after the second day at camp. She says, "You have no idea, because I'm acting as nurse, how many of these children are on medications for anxiety? Mm-hmm. Are doctors simply dispensing it without thinking? Are we just giving it away? Is there other motivations than the best health for the patient?"
Yeah. So there's been a huge spike in the demand for mental health services for children. And that is attributed to a large extent by the 2 years during the pandemic when they were socially isolated, which completely interfered with their socialization. Does it cause anxiety? Yes. At the next stage, it really varies. Are they seeing pediatricians? There's a shortage of child and adolescent psychiatrists and therapists, so they all don't have that opportunity. Well, the therapist can't prescribe. But certainly among the pediatricians and primary care physicians are account for 70 to 80% of the prescriptions that you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah. And they're used to, kid comes in with strep throat, prescribe antibiotic. Kid comes in with,
anxiety?
Right. Anxiety. There's a prescription that are written. There's a tremendously high, placebo effect from the most common medications that are given for the anxiety. They also give antihypertensives in kids and adolescents for anxiety. Is there over medication? It's a hard call to make because I'm trying to imagine what other options are there. One other option would be interventions that are more social, that are not dependent necessarily on the family. I find kids involved in group activities, group sports, they do better, not only because of the exercise, because of the socialization issue. Yeah.
What about this placebo effect? You said it has an effect. Well, they can just give him, a cherry candy.
They could. Although physicians are not allowed to do that. That's unethical. To give something and say it's therapeutic when you know that it really is not.
Well, that's an interesting point.
Yeah. Where that's completely illegal for us to do. Yeah. So, I really do think that, we've touched on a lot of different things. But and perhaps maybe we should devote an entire episode, talking about what's happening with children and adolescents today and the effects. Part of the problem is we don't even yet know the extent of all of this between the pandemic and cannabis. And not only there are other drugs out there and the internet. Those three alone potentially have devastating effects on children and adolescents.
I agree with all three. They're problematic. But also, if parents are sharing too much with our children, if the parents are anxious, they don't have to share their anxiety with their 12-year-old, with their 15-year-old, and sometimes with their 6-year-old.
Well, anxiety, interestingly enough, is something that is not necessarily communicated verbally. It's in the air. And parents may very well not reveal to their children what they're anxious about, whether it's a financial anxiety or whether it's just a general anxiety. But the child can pick up on the fact that there's tension, that there's a lack of calm, right? I did not see, at least in my life experience, I did not necessarily see less anxiety in more observant Jews than less observant Jews, to tell you the truth. And I'm not sure why that is. What?
You said before about a lot of these studies coming from Israel. Many, many years ago, they pointed out that someone who puts on talis and tefillin is and davens in the morning, shachris, for 1/2 hour is much calmer throughout his day.
Well, in the minute that we have left, I will just make the scientific comment that I don't know that those results from Israel are generalizable to the United States, at least from my own anecdotal experience. But I'm pleased to hear that. I really am. And I hope that in the future we can delve a little more deeply into some of the things that we touched on more generally today, which are also some of them tangential to the topic of anxiety. And we didn't even really discuss ways to deal with it. But I think just raising people's awareness as to its overwhelming prevalence in our society in all ages is sufficient for now.
Well, being that we're limited in time, we have to say thank you for listening, thank you for watching. Please let your friends, neighbors know that we are here. It's the Rabbi and the Therapist, and we thank you for one more episode of Rabbi and the Therapist. If you have any comments, please feedback. We always will welcome that. Thank you.